That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about The Last Voyage of the Demeter, the sixth film directed by André Øvredal, which Universal is releasing August 11th, 2023, after 20 long years of being in developmental hell.
Oh.
Here we are.
Do I know Andre's other films?
Yes, we reviewed his last film, which I really didn't like, Mortal, where Nat Wolff discovers he's...
It's like an X-Men type thing.
Like Thor, like Norse mythology, he's a god.
Yeah.
Troll Hunter, I think, was technically the director's breakout, which I also didn't really care for. The Autopsy of Jane Doe. His most successfully conceived film to date, I think, is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, actually.
The premise, a crew sailing from Carpathia to England find they are carrying very dangerous cargo. This is about Dracula traveling from his home to London. Mm-hmm. My pull quote, I would have rather watched a film called The Last Voyage of Demeter Joe, a halftime show.
Yeah, let's go back to that.
Go ahead.
I said, if the journey is the destination, could we go somewhere else? Impressively grotesque kills and a curious presentation of an iconic undead antagonist as a leathery gargoyle can't live in the script's antiquated style or debatable casting.
Well, that's the full review right there. Okay, here's the problem. The movie starts with the ending. So like anytime you start a story with the end, or like when you start a joke with the punchline, you assume that it's the journey, it's the build-up, that's what's gonna get you. And in this movie, it doesn't work because it's just like a basic slasher movie, like Dracula on this boat killing everyone until he gets to the coast, which we know is going to happen because the film opens with the boat reaching the coast. Then everyone knows Dracula. So we all know ain't nobody killed Dracula. So it's like we know he's already gonna make it. So yeah, I was just like sitting there for 2 hours like, okay, well.
Yes, and when you have such familiar material, we have to depend on other things to make it interesting, like the writing. But yeah, we get a blurb about how it's 1897 and we're on an English coast and the Demeter has been found, it's derelict, it's been crashed, and then we... find a diary that the captain's log that somebody opens in the rain. I don't know why, because it's washing the ink away, so you should close that book.
Which looked kind of crazy.
It did look crazy. But this, and that is an homage to what this is based on, which is, of course, a chapter from Bram Stoker's classic novel, Dracula.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the story is very simple. So the film opens with the ship reaching the coast of England, and then we rewind 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. And we see that basically Dracula had his minions take him and his casket along with 50 crates of like soil. Mm-hmm. And I'm not fully familiar with the mythos of Dracula.
Rare earth soil.
But I guess Dracula has to travel with like the soil from his land. The film doesn't explain it, but we see that he has paid a huge sum to have these 50 crates, one of which is his casket, transported to England. And then for 90 minutes, we just see Dracula plucking everyone off one by one until there's one man standing. And that man is Clemens, who's played by...
Corey Hawkins, who you probably know best as Dr. Dre from Straight Outta Compton.
Yeah.
We've reviewed a couple other things with him, including In the Heights. He was in something else. Kong Skull Island.
So this black man is in Romania because he's actually British and he studied at Cambridge to be a medical doctor. So he is a physician, but we at a point learned that he had a hard time securing employment because he's black in the UK. And then randomly one day gets a letter from like Romania saying that he could be like the personal physician to like the Queen. So he goes out there and once they meet him, they say, no thanks, because you're black. So he needs to get his way back to England with no money. So he finagles his way to be a member of the crew on this ship.
But he's initially rejected from it.
He's rejected because they think he's too smart, his hands are too soft, like he's not going to work, like do manual labor. But something happens that allows him to get on. So yeah, the bulk of the running time is the crew being taken out one by Dracula, who's obviously very smart and knows that I mean, he needs to feed, but also he needs to get his stuff to England, so he can't kill everyone while they're out on the high, like in the high seas. So he's sort of like waiting until they get closer to shore to then kill everyone. But of course, the boat makes it. Clemens is the last one standing, and the final 5 minutes, we see that Clemens has made it to London, and there's narration of him saying that basically he's going to be like Van Helsing. I don't know. Is there a sequel plan for this movie?
I don't know. It's are you going to be Van Helsing or Renfield?
That was one of the more awkward endings I've seen in a movie in a long time, where it's so obviously setting up the next one.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot about this that feels very old-fashioned in a way that it doesn't need to.
There is one major character I didn't mention, which is Anna.
Played by Aisling Franciosi.
Who I liked her as an actor. I think I have issues with the casting, but she was from the village where Dracula's castle was, and he has brought her with him to feed on her. But because there's rough waters at sea, the crate she's in breaks, and Clemens finds her. The crew believes she's a stowaway, and they want to throw her off the boat, but Clemens is like, no, we have to save her. So he performs a series of blood transfusions, which we could talk about, which keep her infection at bay, meaning that she doesn't turn into a full vampire. So she's able to help everyone try to defeat Dracula, but they're not successful. And in the end, because they haven't been able to do the transfusions, she says, let me just die. So she floats off into the sunset and, of course, burns.
Everybody's so pious and humble in this. There's these martyrs that are leading this film. Aisling Franciosi, if you haven't seen Jennifer Kent's The Nightingale, that is must see. Her performance, that is a grueling, horrible film. Jennifer Kent did The Babadook.
I liked her.
I don't think she's right for this role.
I don't understand why she's speaking English, but perfect English.
Yes.
And is not fully traumatized by the fact that Dracula's been feeding on her and she was in a crate. But okay.
Yeah, there are some interesting things, particularly since, as I mentioned before, people have been trying to make this film for a long time. I remember being excited when Neil Marshall was going to do it with Viggo Mortensen. But now that they've reconfigured it to center on these two characters, I think that we're really missing out on some really interesting characterization. To me, it's basically Alien on a Ship, as the director himself has called it. But to me, this is very Alien 3, where a black man and a white woman are trying to save this small microcosm that they're a part of. Even Corey Hawkins gets the last name of Clemens, which is the Charles Dance character in Alien 3. But navigating the development of how these two people came to be in this certain time and place, I think that would have made for the more interesting element to inject in this slasher film.
Sure. Okay, so part of how Clemens tries to get on the boat initially is he says, well, I'm smart, I'm a doctor, I have equipment, so I can be the medical care on the boat.
I'm trained in astrology.
I'm trained in astronomy, so
sorry.
I can read the stars. So, if your compass breaks or you lose your maps, I can still get us to where we need to go. But then they're like, no, you seem a little soft. But then there's a point when the captain, played by
Liam Cunningham,
his grandson Toby,
Woody Norman, who we just reviewed in Cobweb.
Oh,
he's also in Come On.
Oh, that's the kid. Mm-hmm. He's almost killed by a crate falling, and Clemens saves him. So the captain says, you know what, you can be on the boat, because the crew member who's responsible for dropping the crate got freaked out because he saw Dracula's insignia on the crate.
Which is a dragon.
Which is a dragon. And he's like, good luck, y'all, because y'all doomed to hell on this boat. And even the crew who bring all of the 50 crates tells the second in command, Wojchek. Mm-hmm. There could be a drinking game.
That's played by David Dastmalchian. They say Wojciech's name so many times. They say Wojchek more than they do in
Dracula.
And more than they do in the Werner Herzog film Wojchek.
Oh. But that actor, I do like him. Where do I know him from?
David Dastmalchian. We've seen him in all kinds of stuff.
He's in that Boston Strangler movie?
Yeah, and we've already reviewed him in Oppenheimer this year and The Boogeyman. Oh. He's the one that kills himself.
That's right. I do like him. Mm-hmm. I thought his character was kind of ridiculous, though. But so that's how Clemens gets on the boat, because he saves the grandson from being crushed by Dracula's crate. Okay. I don't even have that many notes. Okay, so to be positive, I like how the movie looks. There are some creepy scenes. Anytime Dracula is in the shot, I think it's creepy because it's very Nosferatu, like this thing that's hunched in the corner. Some of the CGI looks very digital.
I think when Dracula looks CGI, it doesn't work, but when he's being portrayed by Javier Botet, who we've seen in all kinds of the films as villains like this, like Slender Man and His House, I think that there's a kind of a tangible element to it that's creepy when he's just out of view all the time.
It's definitely their creepy vibes, but I wrote down that the scariest thing in this movie is there's a point, because they're on this old wooden ship traveling across the ocean, and we see at one point like 4 of the crew people on the sails, like trying to fix something, and they're just raw dogging it up there. Like there's no safety net or anything.
No.
That was the part that scared me the most.
Oh, okay.
It's thinking about like in the late 1800s traveling by sea. You know, these people didn't have
Health insurance.
well, just like
I mean,
that alone was very scary to me.
It's a dangerous occupation.
So Anna, the minute Clemens finds her, he's like, we have to help her. And she has some sort of infection. We have to do a blood transfusion. So then all of a sudden, we see him like inserting things in her. I don't understand where the blood is going and where he's getting the blood from. I'm assuming it's his own blood.
I don't know. That it lightly steps over all kinds of things that we'd be conversing about.
But also, if it's his blood that he's putting into her, so like he's taking his own blood volume. I'm not a doctor, but it just seems like the other thing is we're told that because Clemens decides to keep her on the boat instead of throwing her over like everyone wants him to do, he's only getting half of his rations. So he's not even eating full meals. He's giving all this blood to this woman on a regular basis.
And keep in mind that...
And he looks good.
And keep in mind that they've been promised an extra bonus. So they are not eager to stop for any reason whatsoever. Including, because notoriously women are bad luck on a ship, according to lore. So these men are also on edge because the stowaway is also
that's important because Dracula's people give the captain a bonus that is more than what they paid to be on, like to even take the trip. So they're all going to get like more than double their pay if they can get the cargo to England in a timely manner. So no one's interested in stopping. So when Clemens is doing the blood transfusion, he's doing all that and we see him with her multiple times. And then at a point when she finally wakes up and she's able to communicate very well in English, he's like, well, what's up with you? And this thing that you think is like brought you here. And she's trying to explain that this like demon man named Dracula. And then she shows him her bite marks and they are all over her body. And I'm like, how did this doctor who's performing all these blood transfusions on her not notice that she was all bit up?
Right. Again, there are so many interesting, creepy elements that they could have used in the build-up instead of this kind of standard thing. There should have been some communication issues that heightened the tension. And
I like to talk about children, but I didn't care for the Toby.
He seemed too modern.
Too modern, too chipper. Like he was just very like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and
he should have been
too modern.
He should have been a Dickensian waif. That I also wanted to know, why is this kid with the grandpa? It's
he does mention something about his sister or something,
but
it was just enough. Like why is, and then the way
it's not enough and it's not interesting, and it's also grandpa's last voyage as well, and he doesn't want it marred by any drama.
The actor who played the guy who bashes his head through the door. I liked him. So one of the crew member gets infected and turns into a vampire, and then we get a sequence where he's trying to like get Toby, the grandson, and the violence is pretty graphic. We see him we see Dracula like bashing someone's head into the floor that looks pretty gory. Then this guy bashing his head through the door trying to get to Toby, that's pretty graphic. And it's during that scene that Dracula gets the grandson. That was one moment I was surprised by. Because normally in movies like this,
they don't kill the kids. Yeah.
No, but in this one, they do get that little boy. But then that guy who bashed through the door, now that he's a vampire, but of course no one knows or believes in that yet. So they tie him to a post on deck. And I thought a creepy scene was and he looks rough. His eye, his orbital sockets are broken. One of his eyes is kind of hanging down. And he's under his breath saying, it burns. It burns. And even I was like, what is he talking about? Because I had forgotten that he's a vampire and the sun is coming up. And then all of a sudden, he burst into flames. I thought that was good. Then we see the little grandson. He gets turned into a vampire. And there's a scene where they're going to give him like a funeral and dump him over. But the granddad's like, no, he's still alive. I saw him move. And he opens up the sheet and little boy catches on fire, which causes the granddad to burn. I thought that was effective.
Yes, again, there are effective, grotesque kills that are designed to cause a reaction.
So the casting. So Anna, I thought that was weird. I didn't care for the grandson. Then there's the cook on board, whose name is Joseph. And I know him from...
Jon Jon Briones. Yeah, you know him as Andrew Cunannan's dad.
In the assassination of Gianni Versace. I thought he was miscast. He's playing this like religious zealot on the boat who thinks that the demon's on board because everyone is like a sinner. And then there's a scene that I did think was effective where the cook, Joseph, gets on the life raft and tries to like just ride off into the sunset. And Dracula gets his ass, because I think that's the first time we realized Dracula has wings and can fly.
And then it's like, I wanted to feel the anguish when the whole crew realizes he can fly, because their plan is to scuttle the Demeter and get away in a boat. You know, once he can fly, it's...
Yeah, because as the audience, we know that Dracula needs his dirt, but like these people on the boat don't know that. So yeah, I would have been like, well, if he can fly...
Like, we're just doomed.
We're doomed. Yeah.
What's plan B?
Okay, I like the actor playing Clemens well enough. Like, I think he did what he was told to do. But he has like 3 or 4 like little monologues that I thought made no sense.
They don't, and it's not... I can see him doing the best he can with them, but it's the script. Bragi F, Schut, and Zak Olkewicz, who wrote Samaritan and Bullet Train and Fear Street Part 2.
It's like he's too earnest and pious for what? And so the first time he gives a speech is like the first meal they all have together on the boat, and everyone's celebrating like, we're going to get like more than double our pay as a bonus. What are you going to do? And everyone's talking about what they're going to do with the money. And then Clemens, old whack ass, is like, well, what I want most in life, you can't buy. And of course, everyone's like, buzzkill.
He's like, I need to know what makes this life what it is, and blah, blah, blah. Oh.
Then his backstory about being this black physician who couldn't get work is important to this character's story. But the moment when he tells the audience is so awkward because he's talking to Wojchek. And Wojchek says something to him totally unrelated, and then Clemens just gives this speech about being a black doctor that I thought felt really... again, it's an important... Like, we need to know this, but I don't know that was the way we learn it.
It feels very much like that part where we've changed this character to a black man, and we're gonna plop that in there.
Oh, sure. Then in the end, when we see that Clemens is in London and he's sitting in a pub, he's sketching a portrait of Anna, which was corny, and then we get narration of him talking about how he's going to make it his mission to stop Dracula. And then we see that Dracula's actually in the bar following him. But the narration I thought was corny, like...
Is it bad? I thought there were white men worse than Dracula that should be taken care of first.
Yeah, maybe just let Dracula... I mean, you know, let him go do what he needs to do. There's a moment when they have this elaborate plan to scuttle the boat and kill Dracula. And we already get the sense that because the one guy the crew member who turned and burned on the deck, he says, I can hear everything. Turn and burn it. Tina Burner. He says, I can hear everything. I can hear your thoughts. I can hear. So Dracula can hear everything. So as the audience, we're like, well, Dracula knows their plan. And then, so we have this like kind of long sequence of them planning this thing. And then all of a sudden Anna goes, oh, he can hear everything you're saying. Mm-hmm. So this plan's not going to work. That was such a buzzkill. Like, why did we sit through this long ass...
I just, you know, when you are, when you're back against the wall, I don't know, no one's tried to murder me yet. But I feel like when if that happens, and I'm fighting for my life, in the pouring rain on the top of a ship, and there's a vampiric creature coming at me, I'm not going to give a soliloquy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem, too, is, like, we all know this character of Dracula very well. And if you don't, the movie tells you that the ship does make it to shore. So I just feel like all this effort put into, like, oh, we're going to scuttle the ship. Well, clearly you're not. And then we all know Dracula persists. So, and then if you've read Bram Stoker's Dracula, it's like you already, I just think it's such a weird piece of the story to want to make a 2-hour movie out of.
Yes, and I don't know if we're gonna get the chapter book version of Dracula. And I want to say that blood transfusion, that's the dumbest blood transfusion since Don Juan DeMarco.
I think the more interesting story would have been this entire movie should have been the first like 20 minutes of the film, and then the last 10 minutes should have been the remaining hour and a half. I think that would have been more interesting.
Mm-hmm. Again, there are how this film came together. There are very interesting elements that should have been utilized more effectively.
What would you give The Last Voyage of the Demeter Joe?
2.
I would give it 2 out of 5. Anything else?
No.
Hit the thanks button. Listen to our podcast. Bye.